Hey, good morning. I'm Luke Cannon, and thanks for coming out today. And what I'd love to do today is to give us a chance to get out into the wetness, into the garden, into our wild spot, into our different habitats here on the land, and look and listen and talk about the different birds that we see on the landscape, what we're hearing, where they are on the landscape, what observations we can make of the bird's color and size and shape and those pieces. So we're going to go into identification right in the field right away. And I kind of wish at times when I teach bird classes I could do the background and context and big picture stuff first, and then we could go out to the field and you have some things to be practicing and looking for. But the early worm gets the bird is what I always say, right? The birds are most active in the morning, and so if we can get out into the field now, not only that, but there's a good chance of thunderstorms sometime in the next few hours. So I think getting out there early gives us the best chance to observe birds in the wild space. So we'll go and we'll play and we'll get our feet wet and we'll get a little dirty and we'll have our little moment. And then after checking out a few habitats out there, we're going to come back this way. And then I have a little slideshow presentation or PowerPoint presentation. And Wade's pointing out a nest here.
Two.
Oh yeah.
They look different a little bit.
They sure do. Have you seen any action in there this morning? Great, let's keep our eye on this one. Before we start, I want to read you a poem. This is from Mary Oliver's book, Owls and Other Fantasies, and it's a poem called Wild Geese. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things. And before we jump into the field, I just want a presence that, what a treat to be able to study birds, like what beauty and what joy they bring us. Especially as we get used to seeing them and recognizing them and getting to know individuals, and as you get to know the individual cardinal or the Carolina wren or the phoebe that's nesting under your porch eaves, a lot of joy can come into our lives and a lot of learning too. So I just want to name that some of the reasons that I do this. One is for the joy it brings to my life. Two, eco-literacy. I want to be a responsible earthling and learn about my greater community, not just the human world, but like what else is here on this astounding planet that allows us to be and allows this whole habitat and ecosystems around us to function. And then lastly, I also just want to name like responsibility. In this day and age, bird watching is a joy for us and a pleasure for us. And even further, I think we have responsibilities as humans, as stewards, especially as creatures that have such great impact on the environment, to learn about what's here and how we can live in some sort of harmonious or beautiful way with it. And we are learning that a bunch. There's this big surge right now of folks who want to reconnect with the land, who want to learn the plants and the wildflowers and the animals that live around them, that are interested in becoming eco-literate again, which is nice because I feel like so many humans, we got a pileated woodpecker flying by. So perfect timing, because pileated woodpecker is what we call a keystone species. There are hundreds of species, not just bird species, but insect species and animal species, mammals and all sorts of creatures that depend on the pileated woodpecker living just how it does. And so it lives in a way of service that allows so many other creatures to live. So I just want to name that as a nice example for us to go for. And let's take this time and go and see birds and enjoy them And we're just going to naturally, I think, start to make connections with them that will help us make choices in our lives, that will help us steward the ecosystems we have here. So how's that sound? I'm going to bring my book with me, so if I'm talking about a bird and you don't get to see it, let me know, and I'll open up my field guide and be able to show you a picture. There's probably a few folks that maybe have phone apps that they could also use to show you a picture. And I will talk about books later, but just to say this is the one I most recommend for folks who are beginning. This is the Peterson Guide. Peterson's Guide to Birds of Eastern and Central North America. And again, there's a number of field guides, and later on in the slideshow, I'll talk about a few different ones and the pros and cons of different ones. But briefly, I'll say what I love about this one is that the pictures and sides are drawings rather than photographs, and the drawings are big. And so the arrow that points to the feature that they want you to look at, it's easy to see. There's a nice description. And another thing is, rather than just having this teeny tiny little map on the side that you can barely see unless you pull out your magnifying lens or your botanical lens, is in the back they have the range maps enlarged. It has a few less species in it than the Sibley's Guide or a couple of the other guides, but that's actually helpful when we're starting to have less species to decide which wren we're looking at, etc. So highly recommend it, and there's lots of great books. So if you have a Sibley's or a Kaufman or something like that, still great. Awesome, perfect. Let's mosey down. There's a piece called the honoring routine that some of you may have learned about. How many folks here came to the bird language workshop last summer? Okay, oh good, okay. Well, we'll talk about honoring routine, but there's actually a decent influence on how we're feeling and what our thoughts are focused on and our moods that makes a good influence on what we're seeing in the natural world and how it's responding to us. So one of the first things I'm always encouraging my students to do is to tune in onto something that helps them feel peaceful or relaxed or happy. And then usually the next step is I'm asking folks to tune into their senses. And so one of the senses right now that we might want to just engage in is I just saw a few folks take a breath. Nice. Let's take a few breaths and maybe just reach out with your ears for a moment. Your voices, a distant car on the country road. Maybe hear the stream and go even a little bit deeper. What are the different sounds you can hear in the water? What are the higher notes and the lower notes? As you start tuning into birdsong, you'll probably hear some that you recognize and know the names to. You'll probably hear some you recognize and don't know the names to. And you might very well hear some you have no idea what it is. That happens to me every day. But one thing that I'll ask you to do as we start to observe birds and learn to identify their songs is that the songs, or actually the vocalizations that they're making, are going to give us more than just identification. As we tune into bird vocalizations, we're going to start understanding the different moods that the birds are in. And it takes a little bit of time to get to know the different species, but it's actually a lot easier than you think. I have students all the time who start doing this piece of trying to figure out what mood the bird is in, and they're just really accurate with it right off. They just start asking, what is this bird thinking about? How is it feeling? What is it up to? And so many times birding or bird watching can just stop with the identification of a species. And the style of bird watching and birding that I really am promoting with folks is a type of birding where folks connect in with the creatures that they're observing. I don't care if it's a chipmunk or a squirrel or a bald eagle. What's it up to? Not just identifying it, but what is it up to? What is it doing? Because it's going to be through deepening our relationships with the animals on the landscapes that we're going to learn how to steward the land. We're going to learn how to make decisions around where to place our barn and what crops to use and what we want to use to take care of cucumber beetles or not use to take care of cucumber beetles, etc. So there's going to be a lot more information. Well, it might even, later today we'll get just a little bit into bird language later this afternoon, and we'll learn that what the birds are saying and how they're feeling will tell us other information about the landscape, like when the fox is moving through, when a hawk is going after your chickens, if there's a deer that just gave birth in a little patch of woods in your backyard that you didn't even know there were deer in. So a lot of neat information comes from bird language. Okay, I want to walk around the landscape, and what I'm going to do is I'll point or gesture a little bit. Sometimes I think in the bird world it's rude to point. A lot of times when I point right to a bird that's singing, it stops singing. So I'll kind of be like, I'll point to some sounds, and what we'll do is we'll try to hear them. If we're having trouble hearing them, I might pull out my little gizmo, my bird app, and I'll gather people in and we'll listen to it. And then we'll listen again to see if we can match the sounds. Because sometimes when I'm teaching folks bird sound, in the beginning there's just so many different noises it can be overwhelming. How many folks here already do a little bit of birding? You've gone out a few times. Okay, you might know cardinal or Carolina wren. Great. Anybody here an ear birder? You spend a lot of time listening to birds and identifying them by ear? Awesome. Great, because turns out that even though our visual sense can be blocked by a lot of different objects, and thus we only have so far we can see. I can't see any birds on the other side of this house, right? However, I can hear birds on the other side of this house. Our sense of hearing can reach out around the landscape in amazing ways if it's the right landscape. If I'm next to a roaring creek, not so much. If I'm next to an interstate or a busy road, it can be a lot harder to do. But in a lot of natural environments, our sense of hearing are going to reveal sometimes dozens and dozens of species on the landscape that we might not be able to see. Especially this time of year once the leaves have come out on the trees, and a lot of birds are expert hiders. You can have 100 birds in a tree and not even realize it. As you're walking closer, you see 25 grackles pop out. And you're like, oh, I didn't know there were grackles in that tree. And you walk closer, and then 50 grackles pop out. Oh my gosh, there's still more in there. That was amazing. And then you get closer, and another 50 jump out. And this tree at this point is only 10 feet away. But your ears would have told you that the whole time, right? The common grackle, often here in pretty big flocks, making these interesting, rusty hinge noises. Almost like the swing set playground that hasn't been greased forever, right? The grackles make a sound like that with their throats. So we have two of the most common birds singing here near us, and they're two birds that live here all year. It's the Carolina wren and the northern cardinal. Let's walk over towards this northern cardinal. Oh, and we have a song sparrow too. Let's walk over towards the northern cardinal and we'll take a listen to its song, and we'll talk about it a little bit. Can you see right up here at the top of this willow, we have a bird singing. We have a song sparrow. And I love this moment because later on this afternoon, I'm going to talk a bit about birds on the landscape, and particularly location on the landscape. Right in the top of this willow, if you step this way, you'll have a silhouette against the sky. It might be a little easier to see.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, huh? The male song sparrow loves to perch about 10 to 15 feet off the ground. And he's getting up there and singing his song, letting other song sparrows know that this is his area, this is his turf, this is my side of the garden. Letting female song sparrows know how good of a singer he is. And so he just flew from this perch, which is kind of a nice zenith place, a place where he can be seen really easily. Now song sparrows prefer, how about this, song sparrows in our area prefer to perch around 10 to 20 feet. I would say that bird is 20, maybe even 22 feet high at this point. Oh, and we have a hawk flying over, and everybody goes quiet. And the hawk has something in its claws. I think it was a rodent. I think it was like a meadow vole or something. So song sparrow, this song, even though it's a very common bird, this song is not the easiest one to learn. It's a little complex. Can anybody here imitate it? We've been sitting here listening to it for a while. And by the way, when I say imitate, I don't mean like do a good job of sounding like it. I just mean like its general flow. it's like it doesn't sound anything like what I'm doing, but what I'm going for is a little bit of cadence and a little bit of pitch. There's a mnemonic for song sparrows that says, this is an old one, you'll be able to tell. It says, maids, 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 put on your tea kettle, ettle, ettle, ettle. And what I say for the song sparrow is like 1, 2, 3, and then something in the middle, and then a trill at the end. But it kind of does that. It has this little introductory, and then it has something buzzy in the middle, and then it has a little bit of a trill at the end. Now, song sparrow is one of our most diverse species. There's 16 subspecies, maybe more at this point because that information is a few years old, but at least 16 subspecies of song sparrows in North America. So this is a bird that can really have a lot of flexibility in its habitat and in the stripes that it puts on, and its song too, a lot of variations of the song, but most song sparrow songs have that pattern. A few introductory notes, a buzzy thing in the middle, and then a trill at the end. Here's a little trick. You might feel shy about doing this on camera, or even just in public, or even when you're alone you might feel shy about it. But if you imitate the birds you hear, you'll learn them much faster. You hear a bird, you might maybe just look around, make sure nobody's looking at you or anything like that. And then when you hear the cardinal go, just do it. And I swear by it, my students who take the time and do that learn the bird calls much faster. So, because you're getting it in your body. You can even do a little dance. Like if you see the bird do a movement, like make up your own little movement while it's singing that song, and it just brings it in. Matter of fact, even my students that I teach plants to, I try to encourage them to use as many senses as they can to take it in. What does it smell like? If it's edible, what does it taste like? Because using more of our bodies and our senses is going to help us build relationship. Right? We're not just trying to learn birds up here. We're trying to learn birds like as a relationship, like all together. Yeah.
This bird sounds like a big bird with its voice. Is it a regular little sparrow?
Right. Yeah. This is a sparrow that can fit in our hand, but it has somehow its little syrinx, which is about the size of a drop of water, and has 29 different muscles that control the sound moving through it, can project really big. Yeah. Okay, let's wander a little bit more and see what else we see. And anybody recognize this bird offhand? This is a mourning dove. And what was it that allowed you to recognize it? I heard a number of people say dove. Why dove?
Sound of the wings when they fly.
Ah, nice. Another feature is that long, thin tail. It is a long, slick, slender bird, quite an aerodynamic bird. Some of the members of the dove and pigeon family are some of the fastest flyers in the world. Some folks think that the reason why falcons learn to fly as fast as they fly is because they wanted to chase members of this family, the dove family. They're super graceful, often beautiful songs. And by the way, this one is called the mourning dove, and it's spelled with a U as if its song is sad. But I've been rebellious, and whenever I write it, I don't write the U, because my association with this bird is like the sweetest time of spring and hearing it in the mornings, and I always thought it was a happy sound. Oh, nice, there it is flying off, full wing beats. I meant to point out that it has white outer tail feathers before it flew. I was going to go over there and scare it, and we could watch it fly, but it already flew. When you next see a dove or spook one from your garden, right, often they're on the ground feeding on little invertebrate. They're going to fly up to a perch. And it's interesting because having electric wires, you know, they can be a little bit of an eyesore. But what electric wires do for birds is they provide a perch that's high up and out in the open and gives them a good view. Very often, as you're getting into birding, going and checking the field near where you live that has a big electric wire or a big stretch, a big span of electric wire or telephone wires, it can be a great place for a lot of species because so many things just like the safety of that nice high perch where they can get a bird's eye view. So we have a northern cardinal that is on this electric wire. You might be able to hear it going choo-doo, 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 choo-doo. But this is a male northern cardinal. These days I do sometimes carry a phone that has bird sounds on it, but that's not necessary. For years and years I've birded without any sort of apps. But I carry a book with me at all times, checking habitat and checking range maps. So here is our northern cardinal. Male, bright red. Female, mostly dull, like brown and buffy tones. Notice the tops of their heads. Can you see that nice big tuft? Recently, I got to see a summer tanager in our area, a bird that is an infrequent guest to the mountains. The summer tanager is a bright red bird. Unlike the scarlet tanager, which is here a little more often, the summer tanager also has red wings. Scarlet tanagers have black wings. So how did I know the difference between a northern cardinal and a summer tanager? What are the features to look for? And that's where these books are nice. They have little arrows that show you what to look for to be able to tell the bird from similar species. And in this case, the tuft on the top of the head, and then the other arrow is pointing to the beak. Because even from where you are, can you see the big honkin' beak on this bird? Yeah, it's a finch-like beak. It may be a finch relative. They've actually been moving in it around taxonomically. They're not positive what its relatives are, but it sure seems like it has a beak that's ready to crush open some tough seeds. So that's a nice feature. That's a very different looking beak than that of the summer tanager and would be a good identification feature. Now, song-wise, their songs sound very different. So for me, just seeing a red bird in the distance and hearing the northern cardinal song, I don't even have to get my binoculars on it to see the beak features. But I'll put my binoculars on it usually anyway, just because it's a beautiful bird. Most folks here are familiar with northern cardinal. It's quite a common bird, and one of the funnest things for me is I sometimes host people who come from other states and want a bird in our area, and there's often certain birds they want to see, especially birders from the West Coast that it's their first time birding in the East Coast. This is the bird they most want to see. They're just like, oh, I've always wanted to see a northern cardinal. And there might be other rarities that they're interested in, but like to get to watch people see northern cardinals for the first time, especially if they're coming from areas that don't have brilliant red birds, such a treat. Really refreshing for me, having grown up with this bird. I'm like, oh yeah, it's a northern cardinal. The truth is though, I really try, whether it's a chickadee or a cardinal or a wren, I try to always watch the behavior because I'm constantly learning new things. They're introducing me to new areas of my yard and new creatures crawling around and all sorts of things I might not have seen otherwise. Oh, I just heard a wild turkey in the distance. What are you seeing up there?
It's like circling to gain altitude or something like that. I couldn't tell.
Hawks and hawk identification. Hawks can be a harder group. I don't know if any of you saw the book I have in there on raptors, but you know, you start flipping through the pages and you're like, there's another brown one with the whitish chest with a little orange on it and stripes on the tail. It can be a tricky group. Just take your time, you'll get it. Habitat is helpful. Size is helpful, but size is hard to tell because how far away was that bird? You know, depending on how far away it is, it will look really small if it's really far away or really big if it's up close. So it can be hard to tell size while something's in the sky, but there's little features to key into about the wing shape, about how much the head sticks out, about whether or not light shines through certain feathers, where the dark spots are. But habitat and behavior is a helpful thing. We'll talk more about behavior later, but behavior is one of these pieces that as you get to know the behaviors of different birds, it's going to be really helpful. Matter of fact, even if I didn't see, if it was too dark to see any color, matter of fact, even if it was so dark I could barely see the shape of that dove that was here in the garden that flew up to the wire, just by the behavior of it feeding in the garden and flying up to the wire, I might be able to guess it was a dove. Yeah. Although, if it was a smaller, faster bird and it flew off in a lower angle and landed on the wire, I would have probably guessed eastern bluebird because I see eastern bluebirds fly from gardens and land on wires all the time. And are there other things it could be? Sure, there's a number of other birds it could be. But you start to get to know where different things are in the landscape. Oh, there goes that hawk again. Nice. So we have a red-shouldered hawk. I'm hoping it might do a little call for us at some point. It's interesting that it ended up flying to the same area where the hawk earlier flew to. And does anyone know if we walk the garden this way, can we get over to this clearing over here? Okay, let's do that. So I don't know if anyone saw those 3 birds that just came through, but a nice example of bird identification through behavior as well as vocalization. They were 3 birds, and did anybody see their little flight pattern? They were doing this thing like they were riding a little roller coaster, and they like go down and down and down, and all of a sudden they flap a little bit and come back up, and they go down and down, and they flap back up. And that is a real typical pattern of the American goldfinch. Then it did a little call note, something a little bit shorter than a song. There's a woodpecker showing the other group of birds that does this too, although woodpeckers are more like this. They're like that long old wooden roller coaster as opposed to the modern fancy ones that are the American goldfinches. Oh, it's good. It just did its call note again. It did a little see-wee. So they have 2 call notes. This one high pitch, see-wee. The other call note they use is a little perchickery. And I might be able to play those for you. I'll take a moment to mention bird apps. Does anybody here have a bird app that they use that you enjoy? Which do you use? Use the Merlin. I love the Merlin app. And the Audubon. Those are my 2 favorites, actually. One nice thing about both of those apps is, one, they can be free. There's free versions of them. They don't take up too much space on your phone, and you can get Eastern versions of both of them. At some point, 10 years down the road, you might want to be learning a lot more about West Coast birds or occasional birds or rarities, in which case you'll probably want to get a North American app, which might cost a little bit of money. I've been trying out one called iBird Pro. It has pros and cons. One of the pros is it has many, many species. It has all sorts of rarities. It also has a lot of unusual songs. That was a red-barred woodpecker. But sometimes it's hard for me to find the typical songs on iBird Pro. I think they do a good job of showing the variety that's out there. However, when I'm helping new folks try to hear the most common song, I prefer the Merlin and the Audubon app. I'm going to come back to the American goldfinch because we're listening to a nice Carolina wren singing. Cheep, 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 cheep. And it has, okay, so here we are. Northern cardinal and Carolina wren, very common birds, lots of variation of their song. Matter of fact, all of our most common birds, Carolina wren, northern cardinal, song sparrow, and blue jay, they have more variety than most other birds do. Kind of interesting, but they're the ones that hang out around us. Maybe they've been able to survive near humans because they're such tricksters or because they have such variety. I'm not sure about that. But Carolina wren typically is in 3 syllables. One of its other songs, the mnemonic I give to it is slippery, slippery, slippery slope. And one goes Figaro, 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 Figaro. So often it's got 3 notes to it. You could probably waltz to most of the Carolina wren songs. That is the red-bellied woodpecker. It goes brrr, brrr, brrr.
It's a real high pitch.
It's not too high. And we have a blue jay flying in, which maybe we'll join. Yeah, there's the blue jay. Jay. Little Carolina wren at my house nested where we hang our hose. It built a nest in there, and it just had its first egg hatch 2 days ago. So I'm like, oh, it's like really fun bird watching time. And we can't use that hose. We actually went out and bought another hose just to like leave it there. You know, we try our best. We needed another hose anyway. We were just being lazy. Carolina wrens, let's rap about them for just a minute. And at any moment I might pause to point out a bird flying by, but Carolina wrens, we have a bunch of different wrens. Winter wrens are down here at low elevation in the winter, then they go way high up. We'll listen to winter wren songs later today. House wrens could be around here on a regular basis. Carolina wrens are here all year long. Carolina wrens tend to mate for life. We just had a yellow-billed cuckoo fly by. Like most of our songbirds in North America, the Carolina wren is usually the male that sings. That's about 85% of the time true in temperate areas, it's primarily the male who's singing. When you get into the tropical areas, my understanding is it's a little closer to 50-50. But up here, likely because of higher predation pressures, it's typically the male who sings. It's also typically the male that's more colorful. So why is it that the males are colorful and the males are singing and the females aren't?
It's a mating dance.
Mating dance.
Girls have to sit on the nest.
Because the gals have to sit on the nest, absolutely, and they have to be camouflaged. That's super important. And if one of them has to be the singer, yeah, absolutely. The male is going to be the one that we're going to risk getting taken by the sharp-shinned hawk or the Cooper's hawk as opposed to the female. So Another way of saying that is the males are more expendable. Okay, we're done with that. Let's keep going. So how is singing used? Singing is used for a variety of purposes. One of the reasons why we're hearing this Carolina wren sing over here is it's letting other Carolina wrens know that this is its territory. This is its area. It wants to use the resources that are in this given spot. It's probably used this area over and over again each year of its life. When it dies, most likely one of its siblings that lives nearby will be the ones that will come back into this area. It would be similar to you putting a fence up around your property, or even just signs that say no hunting, or whatever your signs might say. So claiming area is one of them. Many species will fly around their area regularly, kind of patrolling the borders, especially if there's high pressure of other males wanting that territory, especially if resources in a given area are low. If resources in an area are really high, or birds have adapted to use resources that are really abundant, is another way to say that, then they can possibly have lots and lots of birds close to each other. So it varies from species to species. One example of a bird that does that is red-winged blackbirds, have learned to make their homes in wetland habitats and eat foods that are very abundant aquatic invertebrate. And so they can actually be together in hundreds. And during the mating season, they barely spread out. You know, it'll be 10 or 20 feet between two nests. Carolina wrens, however, might want a lot more room because they're going for caterpillars to raise their young. And there's only so many caterpillars in a given habitat. So an area that's mowed regularly, they're going to need a lot more space than an area like that that's going to be a lot more chock full of caterpillars. And so we've got birds flying over here. I think they're cedar waxwings. And they are. And they're not making any noises for us. Remind me when I'm done talking about Carolina wrens to mention cedar waxwings, and then we'll go back to American goldfinch.
You mentioned a
Yellow-billed cuckoo, yeah. Yeah, we'll try to peek at that bird too. It's probably going wherever there are cherry trees and tent caterpillars. So we'll go look for that. Carolina wren, the male and female stay together all year long. Most self-respecting birds would never try to stay with their mate through the entire year, right? They're just too much of a pain in the rump. The Carolina wrens do, however, and I think therefore the spirit was kind to her and gave her a lot of vocalization too. You can hear the female Carolina wren growling or sometimes purring at her partner, and sometimes he'll sing a song and she'll kind of growl back, and he'll sing again and she'll do a long trill, and they'll just go back and forth. Once you learn the female's call, it's one of the ways that you can then positively distinguish the Carolina wren song from the similar northern cardinal song, is because you hear the female calling back, which won't happen with the northern cardinal. Some cool behaviors in Carolina wrens. You ever leave your garage open for a week in the spring, and then you go in there to grab your kayak or you know, a shoebox with something in it, and you find it's been chock full of moss, and you're just like, what is all this moss and pine needles or dead grass like stuffed into my different boxes and convert? It's not even a bird nest. It's just like this mess of like stuff. Like, what is going on there? Carolina wren does this sweet thing. He is the nest builder in the couple. Very often it's the female, but it depends on what species it is. But for Carolina wrens, the male is building nests, and he'll build like 5 to even sometimes 10 different nests. And then she'll come around and she'll check out his work and be like, oh yeah, this one looks good. It's got a nice view, and you know, oh, this one's right near the mulberry bush, good thinking. And she'll kind of check out the different properties and be like, oh, this is the one. This is the one that's safe enough and well placed enough and well built enough. It's gonna survive a storm. It's gonna be camouflaged from the blue jays who are trying to find our eggs. Let's use this one. And she makes the call. Very often with Carolina wrens, by the way, their nest, almost like a squirrel's nest. It'll be an entire ball, and it will just have a little opening or two in it. Although it can be an open cup as well. So once she chooses the one that she's like, yeah, that one, he doesn't stop. He keeps going out and gathering materials and putting them places, stuffing them in your mailbox, in that boot you left in the garden, in that beer cozy you left on the back porch, just taking moss and grasses and stuffing them in. What is he doing?
He's making fake nests.
He's making fake nests. Why is that? Because he just needs a project to tinker on now that he's retired or something? All right. Any guesses?
Claiming his territory?
decoy, distraction. There's blue jays snooping around, and all they're thinking about is omelets, you know, or they're Asheville blue jays. They like the raw food movement, and so they're going for raw eggs, and they're looking around. They're spending a lot of time in the spring looking for eggs to snack on, right? It's like one of the best times of year for them. It's one of the few times that eggs are available on the regular, and all they have to do is watch other birds quietly from a perch. Rather than going around and making their loud, ruckus blue jay noises, they do something different than they usually do. They get quiet and they start sneaking around, and they find a little perch and they sit and they watch. And they'll even watch birders with binoculars because they know you're looking for nests too. And they'll go and they'll try to find some eggs and have a snack. What the Carolina wren is doing is fooling the blue jay, because the blue jay is doing just what I do as a birder. I'm looking for a bird that's carrying nesting material in its mouth, because then I know it's going back to its nest. And if I can find a nest, I'll have good bird watching for a week or 2 or 3, right? And the blue jay is doing the same thing, looking for the nest. The Carolina wren, almost no problem with blue jays, because he's stuffing stuff all over the place. The blue jay has no idea, you know, just they're all duds. So fun behavior to watch. It's probably happening in your yard now. Yeah. Carolina wren, we could keep going. They're great little birds to learn. Again, looking into your field guide and learning to distinguish them from house wrens, or if you live down in the flatlands where there's a lot of wetlands, distinguishing them from marsh wrens. Very different habitat. But house wrens are in our area. Winter wrens are here in the winter, but they actually go way north to nest, except for a few species that go up to high elevation. We can talk about that later too.